So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's host, Dorothy Advincula, Senior Vice President with Ipsos's Media Development Team. Dorothy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for your time today, joining us as we share new insights from our latest research on America's most influential consumers. If this is your first time listening into our presentations, hello and welcome. And if you have attended a few of these before, thank you for your continued interest. The data that we will share today comes from our Ipsos Affluent Survey, which is our syndicated audience survey of the highest income consumers in America and many other countries. As many of you know, it is the longest running and most widely used study of affluence in the United States, and originally known as the Monroe-Mendelsohn study, and was purchased by Ipsos 13 years ago and rechristened the Ipsos Affluent Survey. In 2015, the study was migrated from a mail-based survey to online data collection, enabling us to make significant improvements to the experience. It also allowed us to create recontact capabilities for our clients. These relatively short surveys come preloaded with the many thousand data points that have already been collected from respondents. The Affluent study is in field 24/7, virtually 365 days a year. It has releases in the spring and fall of each year, combining 12 months of continuous fielding. In addition, we also release a double base every summer that combines 2 years worth of interviewing to allow for higher sample sizes. And then we also do quarterly barometers, which recontact respondents to the Affluent study to gather in-depth insight on a range of subjects, such as finances, travel, smart home technology, politics, and other topics of interest. In fact, today's presentation comes from the barometer study that we just recently fielded in January, and it is our 7th wave of the Ipsos Affluent Survey Outlook. We've been tracking the outlook of the affluent Americans since 2014, wherein we discover their hopes and expectations for the new year, personally and also for the bigger picture. This is one of our quarterly barometers, as I mentioned, and as such, we also interviewed non-affluent as a point of comparison. So we have quite a packed agenda for today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Tony Incalcaterra, Chief Research Officer for Ipsos Affluent Intelligence, to take us through what we are finding on the state of affluence today. Tony, take the floor.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be presenting today, and we did want to cover a bunch of things, as Dorothy said. I'm going to turn off my webcam for a little bit so we can focus on the slides. So there are really 3 forces that combine to shape the 2021 outlook, and that really is a combination of COVID, the U.S. economy, and national politics. Although COVID vaccinations are really happening at an increased pace, as of this presentation, only 1 in 8 adults in the U.S. has received at least 1 shot of the vaccine. And we're really months away from everyone being fully vaccinated. You know, despite the challenges, we do see a great deal of cautious optimism among affluents as they look forward to 2021. You know, Wall Street continues to break records, and you know, quite honestly, the combined value of American 401ks is skyrocketing. So in today's presentation, we're going to look further into that cautious optimism to understand where, you know, from where it emanates. We'll look at the lopsided way in which the COVID recovery is occurring. We'll examine the mood change that affluents are experiencing. And most importantly, we're going to try to explain how all of this is manifesting itself in the marketplace. And then lastly, what we're going to look at is what affluence will look like in a post-COVID world. You know, are we going to see a return to conspicuous consumption, or will there be a more muted response to the end of the restrictions? So, you know, despite a year that really we'd all like to forget, affluents tend to focus on the brighter prospects for the future. We know that the impact from COVID's economic fallout was really lessened the higher up the income scale you went. And in fact, only a small portion, less than 8% of affluents experienced a decrease in their net worth last year. And more than 4 in 10 actually saw their net worth increase during the difficult times. But it's more than the economics. Affluents tend to see the bright side in most things. And I think the affluent attitude is really well summed up by this verbatim from our most recent study. We're always need to think of things that are heading in the right direction. If we don't think that way, then it might not happen. We all need to be more positive. And quite honestly, after 2020, another respondent was even more concise by saying, look, the only way to go is up right now. You know, as we said, affluents tend to see the future as bright with possibility. So despite the difficulties of the past year, what they're experiencing or what they're expecting to experience in 2021 is a much better life. Almost twice as many affluents feel that in 2021, it's going to be good for them personally compared to 2020. Although, you know, if we really look at this, if we look at the history over the last 5 years, it's quite a bit lower than previous years' expectations. But, you know, quite honestly, this is coming off a really bad year that still in many ways continues. You know, at the same time, only 52% of non-affluents believe that 2021 will be a good year for themselves personally. So the fact that affluents do have this insulation really leads us to understand that they see things in a different light. When we look at it generationally, we see that the youngest generations, 3/4 of them, are expecting it to be a good year for them personally. And these are some of the people that suffered the most in terms of the economic fallout, the higher numbers of job losses, the more difficult things that they faced. Now, similarly, there's a lift in the expectation for their career and finances. And still, this is a large drop from expectations pre-COVID. Now, you know, keep in mind that the vast majority of affluents maintained or even increased their net worth during COVID. But despite the gains made, clearly there's still a significant amount of unease regarding how COVID's fallout will impact the workplace. And frankly, the ability for affluents to have upward mobility and to increase the money in their pocketbooks. You know, when we look at the highest income groups, those folks making $500,000 or more, 3/4 of them are saying that it's going to be a good year for their career and finances. And this, of course, is the group that had the least fallout in terms of losing jobs or suffering things like being furloughed or having to take pay cuts. On the other side, the lowest group thinking that next year is going to be good for their career and finances are female non-affluents, even more so than male non-affluents. We're going to talk a little bit more about the disparity between genders in a little bit. Now, there's always been a bit of trepidation about the economy moving forward, really despite good feelings about the previous year. So, you know, in terms of the positive outlook, the numbers for 2021 are not far off what we've seen in previous years. They're in the mid-40s. Excuse me. It's close to 3 times better, though, than what people experienced in 2020. So what's different is that for the first time since 2017, the forward perception of the economy is higher than looking back. And some of this is attributed to the fact that affluent Democrats, of which 62% feel that 2021 is looking good for the economy, is centered in the fact that there's a new administration. Still, we really should note that about 1 in 4 affluents feel that 2021 will not be a good year for the US, and an equal number are really on the fence. They're just not quite sure what's going to happen. Yet given this level of anxiety and the experience of 2020, it's really heartening to see that expectations for America as a whole are the highest that they've been in the last few years. It's really increased 5-fold from how people felt that 2020 treated America. Now, again, the youngest affluents are the ones that have the highest expectations. They're the most positive. And in view of the shifted balance of power, Those affluents who lean liberal in their political beliefs are the most excited about the possibilities of 2021. Now, even for those affluents who felt that they had a bad year last year, that it was bad for them personally, they're approaching the new year with this renewed sense of expectations. So close to half of them believe that 2021 will be good for themselves, their families, and America as a whole, despite the fact that 2020 was bad in their minds. They're really adopting this Zen attitude about the future, even though they're still really feeling the impacts of the pandemic. So that's not to say that everything is going to be fine for everybody. Frankly, in this case, not all boats will rise with the tide. About 1 in 5 affluents experience some form of compensation impact. And these are things such as salary reduction, being forced to take unpaid days off, being furloughed, or having reduced bonus and commission plans. But job losses among affluents were really low compared to the non-affluent population, 3% versus 8%. And when we look at the ultra affluents, those people making $250,000 or more, only 1% of those people personally lost their jobs during COVID. And about 5% of them had someone else in the household that lost their job. Now, we do see that some of the lower income portions of the population, what we call mass affluence, those people who are earning between $125,000 and $250,000, they had a slightly higher percentage of people, about 4% of those people lost their jobs, and about 17% of other people in the household lost a job. Now, given, when we look at this, we also see that female affluents had a higher portion of job loss, and frankly, more of the Gen Zs and millennials, as I had mentioned earlier, personally lost their jobs. Given where they were in their careers, you can understand that this really would have a significant impact on their future and their ability to save money. Now, given these impacts, the loss in income, the potential for higher costs, about 18% of current affluents, people who make $125,000 or more, or their households make that, 18% of them are saying that they believe their household income could drop below $125,000 by the time we look at the end of the year in 2020. Now, if that holds true, it'll be the first time in recent memory that the population of affluents will actually decline year over year. Female affluents, as I mentioned, experienced more difficulties in 2020 compared to their male counterparts. And not surprisingly, they view 2020 a little bit less enthusiastically than the men do. In years past, they've approached the next year with slightly greater expectations than men for themselves, their careers, their finances, and their families. So for us, it's an anomaly for us to see lower scores this year. Now, one contributing factor is that really women shoulder a larger share of caregiving for their families. And remote learning and homeschooling during COVID has really magnified the pressure on women, leading to a significant number of women to leave the workforce. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just looking at September of last year, as schools ramped up, 4 times as many women left the workforce as men, leading to what has euphemistically been called a she-cession. But really, there's another cost resulting from COVID: stress. So 1 in 10 affluents are working longer hours or days as a result of COVID's impact on the workplace. 7% of them have had to take on additional responsibilities to cover for others that were no longer working at the company. Now, in addition, like so many other women, affluent women are dealing with the added pressures of juggling work, childcare, family caregiving, and often being the primary responsibility for the remote learning supervision. So it's really not surprising that 3/4 of affluent women say they're under medium to high stress. In contrast, only 63% of men feel the same way. And we're going to, again, we'll talk about this more in a few minutes. But, as bleak as that sounds, it's not all bad news, especially for those who have the most money. Thanks to record-breaking results on Wall Street, investors have seen their retirement accounts and investments climb. In fact, the combined value of American 401ks exceeded $6.5 trillion in Q3 of 2020. And that's a 7% growth from the year before. Now, coupled with reduced spending in many areas, 44% of all affluents saw their household net worth increase in 2020, while another 49% saw it remain stable. In this case, the rich certainly got richer, as those with higher levels of net worth to start really were most likely to benefit from this rise. 66, 2/3 of those with a household net worth of $5 million or more before COVID saw their net worth increase in 2020. And, we compare that to, that only 1 out of 3 of those households that had less than $1 million in net worth saw an increase during 2020. So the increasing wealth of affluents is really expected to continue to rise. 25% of affluents anticipate that their investments are going to grow by 5% or more in the coming year. Now, where will they be placing their money? Retirement savings will be a major component, no surprise, whether it's their 401ks, IRAs, or other retirement instruments. In terms of non-retirement accounts, affluents are leaning towards technology companies, real estate investments, and even cryptocurrencies, especially now that Bitcoin is worth $50,000 a share. Lower down the priority list are things like energy stocks, gold, and commodities. Now, these findings are just the tip of the iceberg, and frankly, we're going to be sharing a great deal more in our next webinar on March 10th, which will be all about affluent financial planning. In that webinar, we're also going to be looking at the specifics of affluent retirement planning, where it sits post-COVID, and contrast that to what was happening pre-COVID. You can find a link to registering for that webinar on our website. So 3 forces, as I mentioned, combine to shape this outlook: COVID, the economy, U.S. national politics. And although COVID vaccinations are happening, as we said, at an increased pace, we still are months away from having a return to some normalcy. Thankfully, there's a mood change that is underway as things are progressing. So the gloom of COVID is beginning to melt away, really almost like a late winter snow, and there's a promise of spring in front of us. We showed you earlier that clearly affluents felt negative about how the U.S. economy fared in 2020, and how America as a whole suffered. Now, neither of these 2 ratings were surprising to us because they really reflected what we've been tracking for some time. Thankfully, we saw an improvement in optimism about the economy in the second half of 2020, really especially after seeing pessimism outrank optimism by as much as 18 percentage points mid-year. We've only ever seen that 2 other times since we've been tracking this information in 2009. Currently, 43% of affluents are very or somewhat optimistic about the U.S. economy moving forward, while only 28%, are very or somewhat pessimistic. So affluents are feeling good. It's holding steady, and hopefully we'll continue to see pessimism decline. Now, we've also been tracking affluence sentiments about America's path forward for close to 5 years now. For that entire time, more affluents felt that we were on the wrong track rather than headed in the right direction. And let's face it, 2020 threw a lot of negative juju at Americans. So, as the year went on, it really wasn't surprising to see more and more affluents feeling that the country was heading on the wrong track. We christen the difference between right track and wrong track as the satisfaction gap. And quite honestly, a couple of months before the November election, that satisfaction gap grew to 40%, the largest gap that we saw since we began measuring this in 2016. But with the election behind us, we began to see an improvement in affluence mood. And for the first time since we began measuring the temperature of the country, there were slightly more affluents who feel that the country is heading in the right direction than those who believe we are on the wrong track. Unfortunately, political polarization is still a major factor in looking at the overall temperature. Explanations of why affluents feel positive or negative are almost singularly tied to where they sit on the political spectrum. As you can see, in September, a slight majority of Republicans felt the country was headed in the right direction, while post-election that dropped in December and even further in mid-January when we fielded the study. On the other side of the aisle, Democratic satisfaction grew tenfold between September and mid-January, with independent satisfaction growing about 50% over that same time period. This certainly seems to be good news for the new administration, but really only if they can build consensus on critical issues moving forward. It's a tenuous spot in terms of the population thinking that things are moving in the right track versus on the wrong track. Now, overall, 42% of affluents feel the country is headed in the right direction. It's a lift of 5 percentage points from that same time period last year. And quite honestly, the percentage of those feeling that we were on the wrong track dropped 11 percentage points, which was a big deal. There has been a moderate change in the perception among male affluents during this time. However, we still see more men who feel that we're on the wrong track than in the right direction. There's a substantial migration, though, of men moving to the neutral viewpoint, waiting to see just exactly what's going to happen. Now, earlier we mentioned that the higher levels of stress that female affluents were under colors their view of what's happening. However, it is the female affluents that have really tipped the scales in favor of right direction, moving up 12 percentage points from the previous year, while those thinking we were on the wrong track dropped 17 percentage points. When it comes to the personal day-to-day micro issues, that women are less positive versus men because they experience that firsthand in a different way. Whereas at the macro America level, they show improved positive outlook versus men. And that's really likely due to the causes and issues that are at the forefront today, where we seek to bridge and acknowledge the equality gap. Women are more likely than men to have a renewed sense of hope, while men are just simply more skeptical of the future. So some of the difference can be explained in how men and women rank the most important issues facing the US today. While both men and women say that the single most important issue facing the US today are pandemics, they split as they rank the next most important issues. For men, the economy is second to pandemics, while women feel that racial equality is the next most important issue, ahead of the economy. In fact, male affluents rank racial equality 11th in importance, behind such things as taxes, election integrity, and freedom of speech censorship. So just how will these feelings, manifest themselves in the marketplace? It will come as no surprise to everyone that COVID has broken old shopping patterns. Habits that once were really taken for granted have changed. Small businesses have taken a tremendous hit during COVID, and affluents have recognized the increased need to support those businesses in order to help them recover lost money. However, after learning to rely on online shopping for some time, almost 6 out of 10 affluents tell us they've gotten used to shopping online and will likely continue to do so. So this goes beyond the younger generations where you might expect an affinity for shopping online. And it's extended to boomers and seniors, particularly those who are concerned about being exposed to the virus. They've become accustomed to online or in-app shopping for things like groceries and having things delivered to their homes to avoid being in public. Now, we talk a lot about pent-up demand among affluents, and this really continues unabated in many areas. Purchases and services that they once took for granted really are still outside the reach of many. So the result is a dramatic shift in how affluents spend their money. More on groceries and unfortunately less on vacations and travel. So we really see this in 4 themes: reduction, redirection, reallocation, and restlessness. And these are the words of affluent respondents. In terms of reduction, there's less recreational spending or shopping. They are more efficient when they shop. So there's a very different mindset. They also tell us they're not going anywhere. So they're saving money by not eating out, which serves to allow them to save money. This redirection, over the past year, they've spent more money online than they have previously, and they're looking for special things to help get through the pandemic. One respondent told us they've only entered a retail store twice during all of 2020. And previous to that, they, quite honestly, shopped for fun, and they did that on a regular basis. And when we look at reallocation, they're not spending nearly as much on travel and entertainment, since, quite honestly, they're home all the time. The interesting thing is they're taking that money and spending more on home improvements, really to help make the confined area more pleasant to be in. And for many affluents, because they are working from home, the ability to have an easier work from home environment to make sure that they can be as well suited as they can. We also see that there were a significant number of people who put money away. They saved or invested because, frankly, they couldn't spend it in a lot of places. But it comes back to, when we talk about pent-up demand, this restlessness. People, they're telling us they haven't been able to spend money on things like vacations, but they want to as soon as they can. The biggest change was how little they were able to travel. And we continue to see short term that there are travel plans that just aren't going to happen. They're just not, the comfort's not there just yet. Now, compared to pre-COVID, we saw there clearly was a drop in spending across lots of areas, really with the exception of everyday essentials such as groceries, the need for at-home entertainment in the form of SVOD, streaming video on demand, and of course maintaining the pipes and the technology items that bring that entertainment, bring that connection to our homes, and really give us the items that help us get distracted through the pandemic. With nowhere to go and little commuting, automotive and transportation costs saw a huge dip. Really almost half of affluents saying that they'd spent less than they did before COVID. Apparel, outside entertainment, and personal services such as nail salons, hair appointments, and the like, also saw large numbers of affluents spending less. But the hardest hit, of course, were dining out and vacations, which were truly off limits. Now, moving ahead to 2020, what we see are spending levels are still going to be lower than pre-COVID. However, there's a tremendous improvement across categories. So we see things like automotive, we see 9% fewer people thinking they're going to spend less than pre-COVID. Personal services, we see 25% less we see 25% fewer people telling us that they think they're going to spend less. And for vacations, even though there's still people who are not yet ready to travel, we see a 30% decline or 30 percentage point decline from what people expected or what people experienced in 2020. So the fact of the matter is that even though things are going to be lower in 2021, there's a tremendous improvement that's about to happen. We're going to see more people, as things get better, spend more. And frankly, they're anxious to do that. They want to be out. They want to go on vacation. So as soon as those things are really within the reach of people, affluents are going to be on the road. They're going to be spending. They're really going to get back to as close to normal as possible. So we talk about this in-store versus in-app. This whole new world of retail. More than half of affluents are purchasing products online that they normally bought in-store. We know that these are the kinds of things, the habits that are hard to change back. But that said, about half of affluents are telling us that they're looking forward to going back into the retail space to shop. However, they absolutely want safety precautions in place. 3/4 of affluents are telling us that they'll shop somewhere where they feel they can maintain proper social distance, and that those retail outlets are making sure that their health is protected. We're going to spend an entire day on March 24th talking about the change in retail and how people can figure out how they reshape retail overall. And that's a full day thing that will cross not just the affluent marketplace, but the entire marketplace. So we'd love you to join us on the 24th. And again, you can look for a link to register for that on our website. So let's spend a little time talking about affluence in a post-COVID world. And one of the questions that we often get is whether or not once this is all over, are affluents going to change? Is there going to, they're going to go back to conspicuous consumption, or are they going to really mute the way they enjoy luxury, mute the way that they shop? We believe that luxury purchases are really poised for recovery. When we look at this across both the affluent audiences and the non-affluent audiences, we still see tremendous numbers in terms of the need for luxury now and then, no matter how bad the economy is. The fact that people are looking at luxury as a way to help them get through this. Luxury is seen as a treat for 6 out of 10 affluents. Interestingly, and this is really critical in the current environment, which is the latest technology is seen as a luxury, as something to be enjoyed. What is interesting is the difference between affluence and non-affluence, and that I think stems from the fact that for most affluents, they already have these products, or they're upgrading them versus non-affluents. But as you can see here, as you look through, the luxury is still a huge portion of the aspirations of both affluence and non-affluence. The difference being that affluents have the means to be able to afford these things. These values and feelings about life and luxury, they'll continue to be about personal and experiential. So when we look at what luxury means to people, there's really this dichotomy. When we ask this question, which of these is more important? We see, 93% of people, when they're talking about luxury, for them, it's about their own enjoyment rather than for others to notice. This will play a larger role, of course, post-COVID, because the concern was, will people walk back from luxury because they don't want to be showing off, if you will, when others cannot afford to. But as we look through these things, what we're really seeing is that for so much of this, it's tied back to the experience and the enjoyment. And even when we look at the difference between, would you rather have extreme wealth or a life well lived? The vast majority of affluents are telling us that it's about living well. 2/3 of them are about the experience versus the physical things. And these are things that we've seen, for some time as we're talking to people. We often ask people, would they prefer, if they had $5,000, would they prefer an experience or a physical thing? And for some time now, we've been seeing that it's about the experience. When we talk to them about having more 2 weeks of extra vacation versus 2 weeks of extra salary, for the last several years, it's been about having the extra time to experience life and to enjoy it. So the bottom line is that, we think that once things are back to normal, we are going to see a slightly muted response, but it's not going to be that different from where we were once we get past all of this. So really, if we were going to summarize all of this, we look at it as optimism. It's going to carry affluence through the last phases of the COVID pandemic. Really, despite the awful year that they experienced in 2020, that we all experienced in 2020, expectations of a recovery are very strong. So affluent optimism really is this bulwark against short-term difficulties as we really enter the final phase, or what will hopefully be the final phase of the pandemic. And here, marketers really should focus on the positive expectations of affluence and help focus on a more normal life and what that's going to look like, a return to enjoying experiences and being able to not be afraid. The mood change, this sea change of perspective, and really an easing of the extreme polarization that plagued us through 2020. And here, marketers can really take note of an increased willingness to see the good in others. That makes a big difference. It eases the perils of cause marketing, if you will. And it allows us to emphasize the return to product benefits as a means of connecting with people, the important things about the relationship between customers and the products. The last two things are consumerism, which is really this pent-up demand that's especially related to vacations and travel. It's going to continue to bubble up. Restrictions are going to ease, but they're not going away that quickly. Once more people are vaccinated, once other things are open to them, affluents are really going to break out of their shell and begin spending. And here, marketers should recognize the frustrations that are associated, with this inability to experience life as it once was, and help by offering affluence the joy of experience, even if it has to be virtual for a period of time. Ultimately, the outlook in terms of affluent wealth is going to continue to build at a steady pace. Wall Street is going to continue to do well, or at least it seems to be continuing to do well. And big ticket items are going to be more easily in reach for affluence, particularly because they've saved during the stay-at-home period. They haven't been able to purchase or to travel. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence where I live about how long in advance you have to schedule having a pool installed, a pool built into your home, because unfortunately, so many people couldn't travel that they put the money into building pools at home, and now there's just no place on the schedule. Retailers are going to need, though, to work harder to entice shoppers back into their stores, really in their showrooms. For car manufacturers, for car dealers, really, we've had a period where we've defaulted to online and virtual experiences for the past years. We have to convince people that it's safe to come back, and we have to get them to realize the benefits of being able to comparison shop in person. So that's really what we have today. We really appreciate your time. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them either now or through email.
We did receive a few questions from the attendees, but I think we are, at time, so we will just respond to those via email. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today in our presentation, and we hope to see you in the next one. Ellen?
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. The recording of today's webinar should be in your inbox by the end of tomorrow, so please take a look out for that. Also, we did post some handouts in the webinar console for you to review in advance of getting a copy of today's recording. Of course, we welcome any opportunity for us to speak with you directly, so please reach out to us. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.